Hi there and welcome to Where's the Money Gone, the podcast that takes you inside the football boardroom with me, Adrian Goldberg. I'm an investigative journalist, West Bromwich Albion season ticket holder, joined as usual by Charlie Methven. Charlie is the managing director of Mount Pleasant FC in Jamaica, a former director of both Sunderland and Charlton Athletic, has been an advisor to both Arsenal and Spurs, and was a boyhood Oxford United fan. This week we're going to be talking about Barcelona. The Catalan giants seem to have mortgaged their future to stay on side with La Liga's financial requirements. Some eyebrow-raising figures involved, plus howls from the Owls. Sheffield Wednesday fans staged a mock funeral in Hillsborough Park before their first home game of the season against Stoke City in protest to owner Dejphon Chansiri. But before all that, Charlie, I read out your extensive CV at the start of this podcast. It now has another notch on it, a club in Belgium, Mons. Tell me all about it, please.
Yes. Hello, Adrian. I hope you had
Hi.
a lovely summer. I'd love to comment on your beautiful Brummy tan, but it's not coming across quite as clearly as it might do on the stream I'm looking at right now. I'm here. By contrast, I'm here in sunny Mons in southeastern Belgium. A beautiful city, actually. It's a university city, medieval university city, which is in some ways chiefly known for being the place where the first and last shots of the First World War were fired. And it's a beautiful, untouched city by war, actually, fun enough. It's a lovely place to be. And about a month ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we completed the acquisition of RAEC Mons, the historic football club of this city, founded in 1910. And we are now setting about, starting our ownership. The season starts around about now. We played a first round Belgian Cup match last night against a team from effectively what you call the non-league, and that went smoothly enough. We got another cup game next weekend now, and then the league season here starts the weekend after that. But the reason we bought it, and I say we, myself and my boss at Mount Pleasant, Peter Gould, the reason we bought it is that we needed a venue in Europe where our promising young Caribbean players can be safely brought to on a reliable basis, without continuing sort of issues to do with visas, etc., to make sure that we can continue their development and keep them under lock and key, so to speak, and keep the poaching vultures away.
Because at the moment, if you have a promising player in Mount Pleasant, the club that you own with Peter there, they can be bought up by European clubs. So as a club, your business model then is, or as a business, your business model is that you will help develop these players in Jamaica, give them the opportunity to progress into European football, but you as a business can also take advantage of that then by being the conduit into the EU for them.
That's exactly right. I mean, in reality, whilst we absolutely can have our young players, once they've reached a certain age, under contract in Jamaica to our first team there. The reality is you're never going to get the transfer fees that you might think that you deserve or might want for those players whilst they're playing in Jamaica, in the Jamaica Premier League. They need to come over to Europe and demonstrate that they can do it in Europe, and they can acclimatise to Europe, and they can play European football before the big clubs really come knocking. It's basically an identical replica of the Right to Dream scheme from the academy in Ghana that then bought the club in Denmark, Nordsjælland, and from which, of course, Mohamed Kudus came through, recently sold to Spurs for vast sums of money. But that was after a long journey. It went from Ghana to Denmark, from Denmark to Ajax Amsterdam, from Ajax Amsterdam to West Ham, and from West Ham to Tottenham. So we're under no illusions that we're going to keep our young players through every step of their journey, but we do want to make sure we've still got a hold on them when they make their first steps in Europe.
And how common is this kind of model becoming now then, Charlie?
Very, very. And we join Tony Bloom, Brighton, have got their club here, which he bought under similar circumstances, which has now progressed all the way towards the top of the top division, as seems to happen with Mr. Bloom's football enterprises. It's gone exceptionally well. Leicester City, as seems to be the case with Leicester over recent seasons, not quite so well. OH Leuven are in tier two. They maybe just been promoted to tier one. No, they've been promoted to tier one now. And then City Football Group have their main European sort of garage, as you might put it, at Lommel, which is in tier two. Which any one time City will have 30 or 40 young players at Lommel from their other clubs all over the world, their other feeder clubs all over the world. So they come from all the other City Football Group clubs. They get the best of them, get brought into Lommel, aged 18, 19, for them to get acclimatized to European football. And then if they are absolutely exceptional, they get siphoned into City, but the vast majority of them will then be sold onwards and upwards into the rest of European football. It's been a key part of City Football Group's success that we've discussed before, is that even though it's somewhat divorced from Pep Guardiola's first team these days, it's actually been an exceptionally profitable business model, City Football Group, in terms of the development and sale of young players. So yeah, we are far from alone in this environment. It's quite a common thing. But you don't need to reinvent the wheel sometimes when other clever people have done the thinking for you.
Yeah, I wonder if there is any pushback from Belgian supporters. Do they resent the fact that they are explicitly seen as a feeder club, as a means for people from outside the area, like you and your colleague Peter, to develop young talent and profit from it? Or do they welcome the fact that at least somebody from outside is investing in their club and showing an interest?
Yeah, so these are, I mean, Lommel would be an exception in that it really is a very high percentage of the players there are from outside the geography. But in the other clubs, there will still be a preponderance of Belgian players or French players, whatever it might be, just with a sprinkling of younger ones who come in every year and get moved on. The Belgian, it's not a very large country. It's about 10 million people, Belgium, and it has four very large clubs in Anderlecht, Club Bruges, Standard Liège, and Ghent. And these are four European clubs that everyone will be aware of because they play Champions League football, Europa League football, etc. And those mop up a good 80-90% of the national fan base in Belgium, those four clubs. So the other clubs are fundamentally small clubs from mostly small provincial towns or cities. And as long as the traditions of the club are respected, and as long as the club is kept solvent, because many clubs in Belgium have gone bust, including the one we bought, was originally a top division or second division club, but went bust and went all the way, had to start again in the 8th division. So I think as long as you're respectful of the club's traditions and you keep the club solvent and do things roughly in the right way, then it seems that people can be reasonably relaxed about it, because these are fundamentally not ever going to compete against Anderlecht and Standard Liège.
And as you say, yeah, Mons, I think, went bust in 2014 and went out of existence, I think, and then was revived in 2020. So it's a club which understands the value of being financially sustainable and perhaps understanding what you have to do in order to do that in modern football. I don't know whether there's a parallel here with Barcelona. They seem to be doing some quite extraordinary things in order to stay within La Liga's financial regulations. I mean, there is some quite astonishing stuff coming out of here. I mean, clearly they are mindful that they have to meet these regulations, and La Liga, as I understand it, will restrict your right to spend if you don't meet these financial regulations. But just talk me through the ways in which Barcelona, I mentioned this right at the top of the podcast, Charlie, effectively seem to be mortgaging their future in order to be allowed to continue spending now.
Right. So effectively, there are two separate problems and two ways in which Barcelona are going about solving their problems. The first one of which is the development of the new camp was long overdue, needed to happen for them to close the revenue gap with Real Madrid in any meaningful way. Because they currently, their revenues are about 300 million a year less than Real Madrid. They needed to redevelop the new camp. And that was obviously going to mean taking on a lot of debt, as Arsenal and Spurs have both done in recent times in our country. And that was going to necessitate, over a period of time, some belt tightening as the interest payments and the repayment on that debt went on. So far, so normal. But unlike Spurs and Arsenal, they didn't really restrict their spending in the meantime, because being a fan-owned club, the people who stand to be president of the club in the elections that they run won't get many votes if they say, well, I'm going to have to tighten our belt for the next 6, 7, 8 years and lose to Madrid every year. That's just the way it's going to be. No, they have to say, well, we're going to have the cake and we're going to eat it, rather like our politicians in this country. We're going to build a massive new stadium, and don't worry, we're still going to buy all the Galacticos we possibly can. So they went ahead and did that, ended up getting themselves into vast amounts of debt. Now, the problem with that was the debt they were taking on was increasingly high coupon. So the interest payments they were paying, in fact, these are rather eerie parallels with the UK right now. But anyway, the interest rates that they were paying were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the people who were lending them the money were saying, well, hang on a second. How are you going to pay it back? We want to know that you're going to be able to pay it back. So effectively what they did is they said, okay, I'll tell you what, rather than just taking our word for it, we will give you 25% of our TV revenues for the next 30 years, right? And that's effectively how they sort of kept the wolf from the door. Do those TV revenues then actually repay all the debt? No, they don't. It's the interest payments on the debt secured against them effectively. So they come in and they pay the interest on the debt. And then they're thinking, well, if we do get the new camp, the new camp up and running, and we then get all these big new revenues coming in, perhaps at some point we'll be able to start to pay down the debt, etc. But that'll be an issue for another president at another time, who can deal with that as it comes. Then you've got the La Liga regulations, which you referred to, Adrian, a few moments ago, which, I mean, that they are terrifically good, I must say. What they do basically is they say, right, what's your revenue? And including things like debt interest payments, by the way, all that kind of stuff. And what are your non-playing costs? Okay, right. You can spend on your playing wages and transfers the bit in between, right? So basically, we're going to force you to be operationally break even. Doesn't mean you can't go and spend money on your stadium. Doesn't mean you can't go and spend money on a few other things, but operationally, you need to be break even. So what was happening is because the interest payments were getting so high for Barcelona, those were being deducted from their wage bill. So their ability to pay wages was diminishing compared to Real Madrid. So even though they thought they'd solved the big problem, the debt problem, by mortgaging their future, the problem is the mortgage payments on mortgaging their future were screwing their La Liga structure because they were being included in the costs which La Liga counted in. So eventually, earlier this year, or end of last year, earlier this year, La Liga said, right, you can't sign any more players. Now, Barcelona had already agreed to sign a couple of players, and these players were then left in limbo because Barcelona had contractually agreed to sign them. But at the same time, Barcelona weren't allowed to register them. They weren't allowed to sign them. I think one of them was Dani Olmo. I can't remember the other one. But there were two players basically who were left in limbo, unable to play for Barca under La Liga rules. So they've been in a mess. They've been in a terrific.
Pau Victor is the other player. Pau Victor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So they've been in a terrific mess. They continue to be in a terrific mess. And really, I don't see how it's going to get any better. And I'll tell you why. And it's a subject that we'll come back onto on another occasion, is that when you mortgage your future against your media rights payments, that might just about work on the assumption that media rights payments are going up. The problem is, and this is a subject for a different day, is that media rights payments are at best plateauing and actually in reality coming down right now, right? So even the Premier League, even the mighty Premier League, to get the same level of TV rights deal in the recent round of negotiations, they had to chuck in a lot of extra games, which effectively, when you think about it, means that you're getting less, because the amount you're getting paid per match is going down, even if the total amount you're getting stays the same. And the other leagues are suffering and going to suffer before the Premier League suffers. So, as I said, it's a subject for another day, but it looks to me like the whole Barcelona thing is built on very, very shaky foundations. By the way, the media rights aren't the only things that they forward sold. They've also forward sold their own TV sort of media business revenue. So the stuff that they actually would make from the stuff that they produce, which their fans pay for to watch and all that sort of stuff. That's also been forward sold as well.
That
So the
would be
whole
the
thing's
equivalent of the Barcelona equivalent of MUTV.
exactly right.
Yeah,
Exactly that. Exactly that.
yeah.
So if you think about Man United, Ford selling 25% of their TV payments and Ford selling MUTV, and then you think, okay, but over the next 30 years, that means you're going to have 25% less revenue than you would have done. And that's not actually, that bit of it is not really going on sort of expansion or any of that stuff. That's going on paying interest payments. That's sort of dead money, so to speak. It's not really going to help you. So where all this lands up, I'm not sure. Once the new camp is completed, sorry, there's another thing they forward sold. They've also forward sold the VIP boxes in the new camp. So part of the theory of building the new camp, the new camp, was they'd have much better hospitality areas. But no, they forward sold those to Arab investors as well. So the long and the short of this is, I think it's sort of shaky times, shaky foundations to build from, and it's going to be very difficult for Barcelona to compete financially with Real Madrid, all the big English clubs, over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Ironically, by the way, as PSG proved in the last couple of years, when you've got an outstanding academy, as Barca does and as PSG does, it can be a somewhat useful discipline. Because rather than going out and simply signing all the Galacticos every season, you start to actually have a look and see what you're producing on your own and start developing and promoting that talent. They then become worth huge amounts of money, and your whole ecosystem can actually become a bit healthier. So can Barca trade their way out of it? Yes, they can, but they are going to need to go more down the PSG route.
And just to break down some of these figures, Charlie. So Barcelona sold portions of their La Liga TV rights to a company called Sixth Street. That brought in 665 million euro, clearly a significant sum of money. But in return, by payback, they've got to pay 41 million euro a year for 25 years. So that will add up over that period to more than €1 billion. So clearly that's going to impact them in terms of their ability to compete going forward. It brings the
Well, of
money
course it is. I mean,
today. Yeah.
yeah, you only have to look. You only have to look at what happened to Arsenal during the period when they were paying back the Emirates, and what has been happening to Spurs in the last 5 or 6 years while they've been paying back for White Hart Lane. But the difference is that they're doing so on a structured repayment basis. It's not that every penny that they earn is going on interest payments. It is actually going on repaying for the entire stadium. Whereas an awful lot of what Barca have raised is actually going on money that they basically raised on tick to spend on players, really. That's the problem.
Yeah. So Barca are going to have to change their business model ultimately, aren't they? And hope that, like PSG, they can make the most of this clearly very good academy and hope that that can translate to European success. It just strikes me, Charlie, I should say, by the way, that the book called Where's the Money Gone is now available to pre-order. And
Oh, well,
now
amazing.
it's
Is it?
relevant. It's relevant here, Charlie, not just a plug. So if you put in Where's the Money Gone book, Byline Books, the only place you can get it is through Byline Books. It features a glowing tribute from you, by the way, Charlie. Obviously, we've edited what you sent to us. If you put in Where's the Money Gone book, Byline Books, it's available to pre-order. It's the only place you can get it. But it just strikes me that in that book, I talk about alternatives to the way that the Premier League is. And as you know, I'm not a massive fan of the way the Premier League operates as a business. But the socio model, which is on the face of it very attractive, of fan ownership, to some extent lies behind this, because if supporters can vote for the president who will promise them the most in the way of a politician, then that can lead you into these kind of financial problems, because the president will promise the earth and then perhaps find, shall we say, unconventional ways, risky ways to meet their obligations.
Yeah, as I said, absolutely spot on. I think it's a longer discussion for another day. But yeah, that's exactly what has happened at Barcelona.
They're all discussions for another day. They never go away, Charlie. They keep coming back. Let's talk about a discussion for today then. Sheffield Wednesday. By the way, I look forward to coming to see Mons. I want to go and see Mons. Sounds like a lovely town and an interesting football club. I do want to go to Barcelona again. I'd love to talk to some Barca fans. So we might try and engineer that for this. And I should say it as well, whilst we're getting the plugs in, there is now a Where's the Money Gone, a dedicated Where's the Money Gone Substack. And as well as these conversations with you, Charlie, I'm going to develop the work of the podcast and have written content as well. So if you do want to follow Where's the Money Gone Substack, that's the place to go. But let's talk about Sheffield Wednesday, because everybody who knows English football knows they're a hugely well supported club. They've got a great hinterland reaching into South Yorkshire, and yet they're now currently under a 3 transfer window restriction. They had fans going through Hillsborough Park before their opening game, carrying a coffin, a mock funeral for Sheffield Wednesday. How serious is the situation?
Situation very, very, very serious. And I don't want to overstate it. I think it's a terrific club, absolutely terrific club with a phenomenal fan base. And one of those clubs that those of us who love football and love football history, that Sheffield Wednesday is interwoven into the history of English football. All English football clubs are, but perhaps some more than others. And Sheffield Wednesday would be somewhat sort of towards the top of that list. And even for people of my generation, just remembering their team of the 1990s, probably the last really great team they had. With some terrific players from that era. Your Chris Waddles and David Hurst and so on and so forth. So it's sad to see them the way they are now. And what it is effectively is the result of a protracted period of poor ownership, which has now ended up in a shorter period of disastrous ownership. But let's talk about the period of poor ownership first. So Dejphon Chansiri takes the club over in, I think it was 2014. And I actually met him very, very shortly after takeover. I was at Oxford at the time. And we went to play them in a League Cup game, and he just bought the club, and we met him in the boardroom, and he was very polite, and shook our hands and all this type of stuff. And at that particular point in time, he had money and was about to put quite a lot of money into Sheffield Wednesday, that was then a Championship club. Shortly after, it was either that first season or the second season, they got to the playoff final, I think, and narrowly failed to get promoted to the Premier League. And off the back of that, things then sort of meandered a little bit, and not so much money was being put into the playing side of the club. Now, one thing he was never doing really was putting money into the infrastructure of the club. And I remember then in 2014, which was the last time I was at Hillsborough, I remember thinking, crikey, it's a bit tatty, the old place. It's a bit tatty. And then I heard from a player who, when I was at Sunderland, who had been at Sheffield Wednesday or had been down to on trial there or something, he said, oh my God, when he came to the Academy of Light, he's like, oh my God, this place is like unbelievable. I've just been at the Sheffield Wednesday training ground. It's an utter dump, terrible. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Put all these things in the back of my mind and you sort of forget about them and life goes on. Anyway, eventually you start to hear stories from within the industry about a very sclerotic way of running the football operation. So strange decisions being made about player signings, basically being made by the owner on a whim, whether to sign a player, not to sign a player, what to offer players, and this type of stuff. So you started to get these sort of like little noises. Then they got relegated to League One, which, for a club of Sheffield Wednesday's stature is pretty disastrous.
And it should be said, Charlie, sorry to interrupt you there, because you mentioned the Wembley appearance in his first season. They also made the playoffs in his second season in 2016-17, finished fourth, but lost in the semi-finals of that. But then followed a slide and they got relegated. And this perhaps is an indicative of the poor management of the club. They were deducted 6 points for breaching financial fair play rules. And that's what helped to take them down into League One. So already, I mean, this is going back to 2020, 2021 season. It was evident that Wednesday were not being very well run. I mean, even the EFL were recognising that because they issued this points deduction.
That's absolutely exactly right. They got relegated specifically owing to that points deduction. So there they are in League One, but obviously a very big club in League One, and the sheer weight of revenue, and he because he hadn't been spending much money on any other parts of the club. They don't run a Cat One academy, they don't have a proper women's team or any of this type of stuff. The weight of revenue in the end told, and they ended up getting promoted from League One, the Championship, I think in their third year or something like that in League One.
They
And
had three, they had 2 seasons in League One and
yeah,
got promoted via the playoffs, didn't they, in 2022,
yeah,
2023? Yeah.
yeah. While I was still at Sunderland, actually, we beat them in the playoffs the previous season when we went
Yeah.
up via the playoffs in a sort of famous game at Hillsborough, the second leg of that playoff where Sunderland scored late. So anyway, they're back up into the Championship, but the noises are mounting. You're hearing more and more things, and they're starting to struggle again in the Championship, and they're starting to look like they're going to go back down to League One. When out of nowhere, he appoints a manager called Danny Röhl, who comes in and ends up being just one of those sort of slightly freak one-off managers who is able to get a team turned around and playing in a totally different way. And it basically was like a sort of really weird 18-month stay of execution, because the Wednesday fans were able to swivel their attention from being really worried about their club to being really excited about this team and the way the team was playing and all this type of stuff. And they actually started to look by sort of early to midway through last season, as if they might even threaten the playoffs in the Championship, despite the fact that by this point there were all sorts of red flashing lights going on all over the place. Parts of Hillsborough being, continually being sort of shut for safety inspections, and stories about the training ground pitches not being, ready to use, and all sorts of stories about weird stuff going on in the transfer market, and then veiled comments by Danny Röhl himself in the media about not knowing what was going on, all this stuff. But the team was winning, and as we know in football, this covers a multitude of sins when the team is winning. And then the team started not to win, and then the wages started not to be paid, and then other bills started not to be paid, and then you started to get transfer embargoes and so on and so forth, etc. And then football wages started not to be paid on a monthly basis. So previously it was other wages, staff wages, which is horrible and unfortunate. And speaking as someone who works on the non-playing side of football clubs, something which I would deeply resent myself if I was working at a club and I was not being paid while the players were being paid. But the fact is, and the fact remains, that under the EFL rules, basically it's football debt that is your problem, and football debt is about the players and about paying other clubs for transfer fees. Well, he was doing neither suddenly, as of towards the end of last season, February, March, which is the time of year which does get squeaky bum time. Now, one of the red flashing lights, and this is relevant, the reason why I'm going into this in some detail, one of the red flashing lights for me was he started to put season tickets on sale for the following season in November. Right now, most clubs put them on sale in March, April, sometimes May. And the reason for that, the reason we do that is because the toughest time of the season for revenue purposes is May, June, and July. You don't have any match day income coming in. None of your sponsorships are paid up at that time of the year. You don't have any hospitality sales. You're turfing up the pitch, which is expensive. You're still paying the players, even though they're off on their sunbeds, etc. The whole thing is bloody difficult running a football club during that time of the year. So you put your season tickets on sale in April with the hope that the money that comes in April will fund the club in May, June, and July. But when you put your season tickets on sale in November, and then you're not paying players by March, what that means is that all of your season ticket money has run out before the time of the year when actually you really need it, which is May, June, and July. So the long and the short of that is that he actually stopped paying wages at the time of year when, in theory, you should still just about be okay, and therefore clearly the next 3 months were going to be an absolute disaster area. As he continued to fail to pay the players or fail to pay them on time, that enabled many of the players to hand in notice on their contracts and leave, which in theory you might think was an unpleasant thing for Chansiri. But in actual fact, because quite a few of them are on quite high wages, I think this is something that he would have welcomed, because it was basically cutting the total cost of running the club. So the long and the short of it is, and eventually Röhl leaves as well after a long standoff and fallout in terms of, is he going to come back? Is he not going to come back, etc. There was a sort of, proper fallout. And actually, by the by, there was also a fallout between Roll and the remaining players in the squad as well. But that's, again, we don't need to discuss that right now. But the bottom line is that where we've ended up is he's now managed just about to get himself through to the time of year when revenue really starts happening again, because this is when the solidarity payments from the Football League and the Premier League start to roll in. It's also when your sponsorship money gets paid. It's when your major merchandise sales are coming in for your new shirt for the season and all this type of stuff. And basically from August through until November is normally a time of the year when you don't need much cash injection coming into the club. And my bet is, doing maths on the back of an envelope, is that he's now managed to reduce the overall cost base of Sheffield Wednesday so low that in truth he may well be able to survive through until Christmas or early New Year. And if he manages to sell the goalkeeper, who they're trying to sell at the moment, maybe even until the end of the season. Now, this is the backdrop for his supposed attempt to sell the club, right? Which I do believe he is trying to sell, but he is very intent on getting what he believes to be the correct price for Sheffield Wednesday, and the rest of the market does not believe it to be the right price. Now, there's been a figure quoted in the newspaper saying he's looking for 100 million. I know that's not true. That was in the Sun. The truth is that the number he's looking for is around 60 to 70 million. The problem is that to all intents and purposes, Sheffield Wednesday is now a League One club. They are going to get relegated. They've only got 16 players. They are going to get relegated. So effectively, you're looking at a League One club, albeit one with a very large fan base, with a stadium where the North Stand is now closed because it's dilapidated and can't get a safety certificate.
I think the North Stand did get a safety certificate just before the first game. Actually, Charlie, I think it did get certified.
Well, that last week was it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because as of last week, when I was last tuning into the story, they were having to basically move people whose season tickets were in that stand to other parts of the stadium. But the long and short of it is that even by conservative estimate, there's £10 million that needs spending on Hillsborough to bring it not up to scratch, not to make it into what Hillsborough could be or should be or whatever that might be, but just to bring it into the 21st century, just to enable it to actually live and breathe as a normal football stadium. You're going to need to spend 10 million quid on Hillsborough, and you're going to need to spend a significant sum on the training ground as well. So you have to ask yourself the question, well, what is Sheffield Wednesday as a League One club that has £15 million worth of infrastructure spending required on it? What is Sheffield Wednesday actually worth? Well, on a good day in League One, a big club is worth £30 million, right? Ipswich went for 23 million in League One. We sold a minority stake at a bit more than that in Sunderland in League One. So let's just say that you say, okay, let's say it's 30 million, but you have to deduct 15 million from that. So you're looking at a valuation really of 15 million for the club itself. And Chansiri is at 60 to 70 million, and currently is not actually under direct financial pressure to sell, because currently there is enough cash in the business to be able to pay the wages, because the wage bill is so much lower now because the highly paid players have left the club. He's left with a sort of small number of not so well paid players for the most part. Now, in amidst all of this, and this is where I'm going to leave it and hand over to you, comes the inauguration of the football regulator. So the football regulator bill was passed into law. The football regulator becomes a reality in about a month from now. And part of the football regulator, as we've discussed before, is the licensing of football club owners. You need to have a license to be able to operate as a football club owner. And this is going to be the first item in the football regulator's in tray when the football regulator starts is, am I going to grant a license to operate to Chansiri? Right? Now, part of the regulator's requirements is you have to submit a business plan and you have to demonstrate your capacity to fund that business plan. That business plan has to operate within EFL rules, which obviously he will have no difficulty in doing now because the cost base is now so low that won't be an issue. But you have to show a business plan. You have to show how you're going to fund it. And that business plan is not just for the next 6 months. It's for some considerable period of time. You have to show that you actually have a plan for the club that you're operating. I think it's going to be politically almost impossible for the regulator to grant Chansiri a license. I cannot see on any grounds how the regulator will have any credibility if Chansiri is allowed, after all that's happened in the last year, if he's allowed to continue operating Sheffield Wednesday. Now, he might well say that's very unfair. Others will say that's the least he deserves. I'm not going to take a position on that. I'm simply saying that understanding the way in which politics works, it's very hard to see how the regulator will feel able to simply go, oh, that's an interesting plan, Dejphon. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, no problem. Here's a license. You're a good owner. No problem whatsoever. So the question is, what happens when the regulator withdraws a license to operate? That's the question.
Well, it's one we'll follow with great interest and with great feeling for the supporters of Sheffield Wednesday. I love both United and Wednesday. I love the city of Sheffield and its people and have very warm feelings towards them. And as you say, Sheffield Wednesday, one of the great football clubs. Chansiri failed to pay staff and players on time for 4 out of 5 months. Those obligations have now been met. Wednesday's North Stand was issued with a prohibition notice, but that was lifted just before, I think on the Thursday, before their first home game against Leicester City. But they've lost their 2 league games to date. And as Charlie says, that will be a very real live issue for the new football regulator as soon as their feet are under the desk. And as I say, we will follow that with interest. And if you're a Wednesday fan and you want to tell us more, by the way, do feel free to drop me an email to goldbergradio@gmail.com. So before we go, and in thanking Charlie, just to say, don't forget to follow Where's the Money Gone Substack. That's all you need to put into your search engine to find it. And the book, if you put Where's the Money Gone book, byline books into your search engine, you'll find that as well. It is available now to pre-order, shipping at the end of August, but only available through Byline Books. There we go. That's enough plugs. Thanks, Charlie. Good luck to Mons. And we'll see you again next week. Take care, mate. See you later.
Thanks, Adrian.